The following was recorded in front of a live studio audience at the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe. This is the United Podcast Network.
Welcome to the Quirky Dog Podcast, inspired by some of the quirkiest dogs you can ever imagine, and the owners who love them. This podcast is brought to you by the quirky couple themselves, Scott and Jess Williams. Their aim is to educate and entertain. Here's Scott and Jess.
Welcome, guys, and happy Wednesday. We're coming to you live from Salem, New Hampshire, and I feel like you can't even see him against my white shirt. I'm going to hand him over to Scott. Today, we have our very first clone in for training, so we're very excited. This is Cosmo. He's a year-old Pekingese, and our quirky tip of the day today is...
You got it.
If you haven't yet seen our clone episode with Viagen Pets, we linked it in the show notes because Cosmo actually was a clone that came from Viagen Pets in Texas. So he's a little bit shell-shocked here to be on air, but he's a good boy, and so far, so good.
He's a clone of the previous dog, Gizmo.
Yes.
Gizmo.
And he was a white Pekingese as well. So we brought him in because we're very excited about the cloning situation. Behavioral pottying. Let's talk it up, sweetie. I'm going to put Cosmo in his crate because he thinks we're crazy. So we were talking about this a few weeks ago, and we've actually had some behavioral pottying at our house. But this is a topic that comes up, I'd say, pretty frequently with our clients. This is a big issue.
Yeah, it's not just typical housebreaking. You know, it's the dog behaviorally peeing or pooping in the house to make a statement of some kind.
Or because of anxiety, like this is common, like you may have separation anxiety if the dog's in a crate or, you know, a certain room or something. When someone leaves, you're going to have pottying. But we've been kind of tweeting this apart because this is something that a lot of people mention, and we ourselves, my dog Vital has just gone into heat. She's still intact. She has a heat cycle. And we've had some behavioral pottying at our house. Come here, you're being a bad boy. So this started, Sink actually peed on the bed. We'll just be honest about it.
I was wondering which one you're talking about. It just happened. We had Max go in the other room about a few months ago and pee in the carpet in the other room.
Yeah, the bedroom seems to be where our dogs behaviorally potty. So this is what happens with everybody. But if you really are conscious of what's happening and when it's happening and everything else, when Sink peed in the bedroom last month, I should have known. Well, Vital's going to be going into heat. There's hormones. She's always done weird stuff. When Sink used to go into heat, she'd roll in dog poop. Dogs are weird. But the important thing is that you start to notice these patterns, see these little things developing, and come up with a plan to fix them. So, I mean, I didn't know at the time that Vital was going into heat, but now it's very clear to me. Sink wasn't in the bedroom. And this is another thing. We intervene if there's behavioral pottying. I think she peed on the bed.
Twice?
Yeah, twice. The first day, I thought it was warm weather, and she must have drank too much
Jess
water.
couldn't believe it.
And
she would rather believe I peed on the bed than the dog.
And I was like, oh my gosh, well, I didn't let her out, and this was such a mistake. And then literally 3 days later, Scott's like, babe, I'm sorry, but I think Bug peed on the bed again. So we put her in a crate, you guys. That is what you should be doing if you're having these things that are occurring over and over again in your house. We change things up. We've crated her.
Or at least don't give access to the bedroom and that location unsupervised.
And if it's something that's an oddball thing that pops up, 100% we'll take a urine or a fecal and bring it to the vet and make sure everything's okay. But typically, if your dog, you put them into a crate and they're not now going to the bathroom, or you know that you're watching them in the yard and everything's normal, you run medical tests, everything comes back okay, you're pointing back to some behavioral pottying. And then the question is, what do we do when behavioral pottying pops up? So let's first talk marking. I think that's an easy one to start with.
That's probably the most common is male dogs that lift their leg.
Or females could mark too.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
But the males lifting their leg on the furniture and on corners is kind of a typical leaving their mark. You know where I see this happen a lot lately is when we take a dog for boarding and training when there's multiple dogs in the house. So there could be 2 or 3 dogs in the house. They get along fine, no problem. You take one out, bring it back 2-3 weeks later, and now there's behavioral marking again. Either the one that came in is going to mark, or the ones that were there are going to mark to say, hey, this is my house.
Yeah, they're trying to reestablish
whatever they're trying to communicate with each other, because that happened with Winston.
Yeah.
The other dog, was it Winston peed on the couch?
Yeah, well.
Yeah, so I mean, what didn't have to go to the bathroom, didn't have to go outside, but it intentionally went and peed on the couch.
He was making his mark, if you will.
And then it was over and never did it again, but he had to say, hey, I'm home and I'm going to pee.
Yeah.
So let everybody know.
If you do have marking, and Scott's right, it's normally more with male dogs, what do you do about this? Like, how should I manage this? How should I intervene? Everything else. One super easy thing that if you haven't ever done it before is a belly band. They sell them on Amazon. The ones they sell at like Petco and stuff are kind of bulky and basically like the pee can just be sopping in there. I don't love those, but
looks like a little diaper.
Yeah, it's a great way. You just wrap it around the dog's waist. You're managing that way. A lot of times the boys don't want to be, once they pee once in the belly band, they're like, oh, I don't like that feeling, and that will stop it. You can limit access. Sometimes, dogs will skirt away to a room where you can't see them and they go pee over there. You can limit access to that room. You could set up a camera. I am really, really big on cameras when it comes to behavioral pottying. So Scott and I know our dogs pretty well, and I don't even wouldn't say the pet dogs behaviorally potty one much when they come into our house, but we're really big on let's look at the behavior. If you're getting like peeing, out of a marking kind of situation, typically that's not going to be so much when you leave. But if you do have this like anxiety response of you leaving the house and then the dog peeing, put a camera on the dog. See when that's occurring. See what their behavior is prior. See if you leave a bone out for them if there's a chew, and then you can have someone come and let them out, the first hour or whatever. Start to understand and pinpoint when and where and why this is particularly happening.
Yeah, with a dog that's at home, it could be when UPS comes and someone knocks on the door, the dog gets stressed, and then they pee.
Yeah.
And it's not really a potty training issue. It's they get anxiety, they get stressed, fear, whatever, and then that's what's triggered it.
Wind can be an issue. Some dogs get nervous, like thunderstorms. They start to pace around. And it might not even be that the original intention is peeing, right? The dog is just stressed, concerned, starts circling, pacing, everything else, and then they're like, oh my God, I'm just going to pee, because sometimes that's just a way that dogs alleviate stress and release anxiety and everything else. So whether you have peeing or pooping from this anxiety response or wherever that comes from, start to pinpoint why. If someone is home with the dog, is it happening? If you just leave for a short errand, is it happening? If you put the dog in a back room so they don't know that you left, is it happening? If you're able to use noise diffusion or something, when Scott's talking about the UPS driver knocking, if you're able to kind of drown that type of situation out, the wind, anything else, is the dog calmer? Does the dog stay in this more level-headed headspace? And is the dog not peeing and pooping in your house? Because it is a big stressor, you guys. Dogs are frequently given to the shelters and given back to breeders and everything else for pottying issues. Pottying issues are a huge deal, and most people don't want to live with pee and poop around them all the time.
No, and a lot of people, they default to getting these pee pads because they think, well, the dog had to pee, so they leave pee pads out. The dogs never pee on the pee pads. They always pee somewhere else in the house. But by laying those pee pads down, it's almost saying, okay, I accept
You can do it, yeah.
I accept that you're going to pee in the house. And you don't want to get to that point unless you're actually in a dog. If you have a small dog that you're training to pee in the house, we've talked about this in other podcasts, you have to make sure that is exactly where they pee. They don't pee anywhere else except in almost like a litter box type setup,
Yeah. Okay, so I want to just talk about this anxiety stuff, and then after break, I want to talk about the house breaking, and I even wanted to go into submissive peeing because that's a big part of behavioral peeing too. But as far as the anxiety stuff goes, you guys, people sometimes feel like, oh my gosh, this is a lost cause. One thing I would consider is limiting food and water slightly. So if you're going to work for a long day, maybe don't give breakfast. See if you have less of a response there. Take the dog for a walk. Make sure the dog, alleviates his bowels. He doesn't have extra poop in him before you leave the house. Again, with the camera is a huge thing to help dogs. At least you know what's happening. Okay, it's in the first 2 hours. It's the second half of the day. You can play around with different stuff. Some dogs honestly do better out of a crate. And I'm not saying give your dog access to, your whole beautiful living room with white furniture and white carpet and hope for the best. But maybe give the dog the kitchen. Maybe give the dog, more space, not just the crate. Sometimes the crate itself incites more behavioral pottying. And if your dog is not going to hurt itself or ingest things or something else, giving them more freedom may help. Leaving more frequently. People normally do this thing with separation anxiety where they're like, oh, it's going to be a big deal. I should stay home as much as possible. No, go out and water, go out and run errands, go out and do things, and try not to have such a scheduled routine so the dog knows, okay, mom just got her briefcase. She just put on her fancy pumps. She just put on her nice work jacket. She's going to be gone for the day. Holy crap, I'm losing it. Start to get the dogs so they're just more accustomed to randomized routines rather than just following your structures so much. What else would you say about anxiety and the pottying?
Well, sometimes just putting, some training and putting control on the dog is going to alleviate some fear, which may be kind of at the root of why they're pottying. And by creating these routines, but also control, giving them something to do, they kind of breathe a sigh of relief and just can relax a little bit and not be so triggered to pee, by all these little tiny things that happen.
That emotional instability sometimes the dogs have.
Contrary to what you were saying about giving them more freedom, sometimes putting more control and really getting them dialed in, some dogs really thrive in that environment.
That is true.
They have to have a lot of control put on them. You don't want to do that. You didn't get a dog to do that. But your particular dog may be the type of temperament that thrives with a lot more structure than the average dog.
Yeah, that is a really good point you brought up. Sometimes that emotional stability, just implementing structure and control really does help those things. So that is a good way to play it. And play it all ways, right? Like maybe you put a lot of control, it doesn't help. Maybe you give more freedom, it does help. Try to monitor, journal, like record keep, and definitely think of the camera. Our favorite is the Nest Cam.
I have a good example of a dog where the control didn't help.
Okay.
This is one of our dogs, Shorty.
Oh, yes.
So we had this little, what kind of?
Jag Terrier.
Jag Terrier is a German Terrier, little dog, and just a real hellion. And he had a lot of animal aggression, dog aggression. And so he would behaviorally pee in the crate. If we just took other dogs out to go pee, he'd see them, get all pissed, start growling, and then he'd pee in the crate. So then, okay, we can't have him in the crate when we're doing stuff. And he had a lot of obedience training, so we said, okay, get on the bed. We'll put him on the bed when we let another dog out. And he wouldn't get off the bed because his training was good. But he would just, in spite of us, would just pee right on the bed.
You were so mad.
While we were letting the dog out. He's like, fuck you guys. He was like...
One place he didn't pee, though, was sitting on your lap. He wouldn't... he was very happy if we would just coddle him when dogs went by.
But he was a tough case. And, these extreme cases sometimes aren't even worth bringing up because I haven't seen another dog like that in 20-something years. He just was really difficult.
But, of course, we owned him. That was a fun time. All right, let's go to break super quick. And when we get back, we'll hash this out a little more.
Want to keep up with all the latest from the Quirky Dog podcast like me and Murphy here? Then make sure you head on over to the YouTube channel and subscribe. Or if you prefer to listen to the madness, go on over to iTunes or Spotify and follow the Quirky Dog podcast. And hey, while you're there, leave a rating and review and let them know what you think of the show. Until then, keep it quirky.
Okay, real quick before we leave this whole anxiety topic, I do want to touch on the fact, and Scott kind of brought this up with Shorty, sometimes dogs are pottying because they're mad too, right? And yes, we're, guessing what their feelings are like and everything else. But there are certain dogs, it's not that they're scared, it's not that they're upset. They're literally like ticked off at you. So realize what those triggers are like too and head those off in the same space. But it's not always because they're in this like insecure instability. Sometimes they're literally like, screw you, I'm going to potty just in spite of how I'm feeling right now.
Yeah, and people, it's hard because a lot of times, even when you figure out how to avoid these problems with your dog, people backslide because we don't want to put the control.
Yeah.
We want the dog to be
a free chicken.
A different dog. Yeah. We want to own a different dog than the one we have. So we start saying, okay, let's just let him be. Like, I come in the house last night, Jess's dog is on my bed again, on our bed, right? The dog's on the bed.
Almost done with her heat cycle.
It hasn't even been a month, I don't think. And I'm like, okay, here we go.
It was a
I don't
quickie.
say anything because it's easier for me to change sheets with her than fight about where that dog is going to sleep. But it's like pretty quick. The dog's back in there. I'm like, shit. Okay, here we go. Let's see if the dog's all better now.
We don't always practice what we
No
preach.
belly band.
Oh, stop it. Everything's fine, and Vital's almost out of her cycle. Okay, so let's get back to this situation about housebreaking versus behavioral pottying, because sometimes I feel like if you get a rescue or something and they're an older dog, people just assume like, oh, well, the housebreaking is over, like this has happened.
Well,
and that is not always...
is told their rescues are fully housebroken
I know.
when you get them.
Everyone's told a lot about their rescues, but literally that isn't always the case. So be cognizant of that like when you first get a dog at home, you don't know what their previous life was like. You don't know where they were going to the bathroom before. You don't know what kind of daycare setup they had before. Some daycares just let the dogs, go to the bathroom and relieve themselves in the same building that they're playing in. So be conscious of like treating your rescue like a little puppy. And you want to make sure you're taking the dog out to go to the bathroom, using a crate, all this other stuff. If you're to the point where okay, the dog is housebroken, so to say, then as long as you've ruled out the medical stuff with, urinalysis and everything else, then maybe we're going more into the behavioral side of things. But just because you have an older dog doesn't mean, oh, this dog knows better, this dog is housebroken. Dogs sometimes learn housebreaking very late in life. We've had many 6-8-year-old dogs come in that it's Jess's job to teach them how to become housebroken, and they are able to learn, but just because they're adult dogs doesn't mean they're actually housebroken.
No, and when you take a adult dogs outside, or if you let them go outside and you don't see that they pee and you're having some of these type of issues, you need to watch the dog, make sure that they have fully emptied themselves outdoors before they come back in.
Yeah, 100%. All right, let's talk submissive peeing. I want to talk about submissive peeing.
Yeah.
So this is something I would say, again, like Scott was pointing to, training typically helps a great deal. And there's other ways for workarounds of submissive peeing, and I want to get into those and talk about those, because submissive peeing is, I guess it's also a behavioral pottying, right? It's not a medical issue. There's nothing wrong with the dog. You've cleared that the dog doesn't have incontinence, cleared that the dog doesn't have a problem with its urinalysis sample. So then you're going back to, how the heck am I going to fix this? And when puppies are young, it's easy. We play this off like, oh, he's just submissively peeing. It's not a big deal. But as the puppy grows up, the urine becomes more heavily retained in the body. It's becoming a bigger and bigger issue. You kind of want to extinguish this and get rid of this. So what are some things that we have done in the past with training dogs that have this issue?
That have
submissive peeing.
I can't think of the last one we had. I was thinking the opposite, not to get sidetracked off of that specific question. But I was thinking about dogs going to the vet. A lot of dogs have fear going to the vet, but I don't see a lot of submissive peeing at the vet.
Yeah.
So,
well, that's the thing. It's excitable normally.
Right. And
so
then the
I
other
would
thing
say,
is, we get dogs in for board and train that are totally out of their element. They've been taken out of their home. They're in a strange environment. And some of these dogs don't pee for 2 days. It's like they won't pee because they're afraid. And they only pee in their backyard. They don't pee anywhere else.
Well, that is kind of where I was headed, is it's normally this level of excitement, right? This level of like people hovering, people, oh my God, it's a puppy, or oh my God, hi. A lot of times, if you just kind of ignore the dog, or you ask people to ignore the dog when people are coming over, it helps a ton with the submissive peeing. Yeah. And it matters that you kind of head it off and stop it, even when they're puppies. You don't want this to continue to happen and happen and happen, because it does become habitual. But if the thing is, oh, someone knocks at the door, they walk in, oh my gosh, it's a dog, pee. Let's stop that cycle, right? And if the dog is food motivated, you can just have people drop food on the ground, ignore the dog. But frequently just being like very benign with the environment, not hovering over the dog, not getting overly excited with the dog, everything else, it helps the issue more than anything I think that we've ever done.
Yeah, that's true. That when someone gets home and the dog is excited, the owners are excited to see the dog, and that is typically a time when there's going to be that submissive peeing with a younger dog. And the crazy thing is, I tell people, to use a crate, or I say you have this young dog at home out of the crate, and then you walk in the house and the dog jumps on you, and they say, all alone, and they'll say, no, my wife was there. Okay, well, text your wife or your spouse, whoever it may be, your kid, your teenager, say, hey, I'm going to be home in 5 minutes. Take the dog, put him on a leash, take him out in the backyard, or do something else with them so you don't keep repeating
this
that
thing
problem.
In the house. Yeah,
and
but
a lot
even
of people are so busy trying to figure out why it's happening rather than stop it. Just stop it immediately.
And I guess even calling it submissive peeing might be kind of like a
That's
buzz
more
phrase.
excitement peeing.
Excitement pee. It's the same thing. And this can happen. I
think it's behavioral.
It is. But I don't want people to think like, oh, well, my dog's not submissive. They're just excited to see me. It doesn't matter. And people are like, oh, we'll bring the dog outside. We'll let it happen outside. It's still happening. It's still part of the dog's routine and part of the way that you're interacting with the dog. So ignoring the dog, giving it a few minutes when you first get home, being less like throwing yourself on the ground. Oh my God, I missed you.
You could throw food. You could throw treats on the ground.
If the dog likes cookies, it would help a lot.
Yeah.
But stopping that in its tracks matters, you guys, because the submissive peeing thing we have seen creep into adulthood, and it's not an easy thing to fix. And people just think, oh, well, this is how the dog is, and we'll just get towels out when someone comes over. And it's not pleasant. And Scott's right. When the dog is going to the vet or going somewhere where they're out of their element, you don't see the dog necessarily just peeing everywhere, because they're not in this same like, oh my gosh, someone came over, this is so fun. They're in a different headspace. So when you know that the headspace is affecting the behavior, then we're going to say, okay, well, how can we back up and change, the antecedents before that behavior happens, so we prevent the freaking behavioral potting. Behavioral potting is a big issue that we see a lot.
Yeah, and sometimes it's very human specific. So the dog doesn't have this excitement peeing with anybody else except
one
for
person.
One person comes in, the dog starts peeing, whether they're for whatever reason, whether it's excitement or whether it's fear, but that person is giving an energy off to that dog that's causing the dog to lose control of its bladder and just pee right there. And if that's the case, at least you can, we can see it's just this person because you've had other people come in, it doesn't happen.
Yeah. And when that
so
is...
now we can just remove that person from the house.
Ideally.
They can't live there anymore.
No, but sometimes I wanted to make this point that it is hard for people to like get this through their head. And especially if it is one person, like, I don't care, I just want this. So give that person a task, right? Like when you get home and you want to see Daisy, rather than say hi to Daisy, hand the person a leash and be like, take Daisy for a walk. Go do something. Like create action where there is just this moment of like instability and this thing that's happening day after day after day. Because I'm telling you, once you have an adult dog and it's happening, especially if it's a freaking Bernese Mountain Dog, we're talking about a lot of pee, you guys, and it's not pleasant. It's not an easy go. So head it off in its tracks. Okay, we've done anxiety, we've done marking, we've done submissive peeing, whatever. What other behavioral potting do we have?
I can't think. Tell me what you think.
Let's talk about seasonal. This is a good one. All of a sudden it snows. Little dogs don't want to shit outside, right?
Yeah.
Like this is pretty common, and no one's thinking about it right now. I'm in a tank top for the first time all season. It's getting beautiful here in New England. That is behavioral pottying, you guys, when the little dogs are like, no thanks, I'm not going to deal with it, and they're pooping now in the house.
That's not always size related either.
That's true. It's true. Yeah, some of the big dogs are like, I can't do it. Oh my God, it's terrible. And what do you do in those situations? If you are having that problem and you have that problem seasonally, and sometimes it's only for like those 3 0-degree days,
or it
right?
could be rain.
Yeah,
they don't
same
want to go out in
difference.
the rain.
Yeah,
Same
yeah.
thing.
Start implementing things that maybe you did when the dog was younger.
I
Bring
know what
a
I
crate
do
back in
that situation.
What do you do?
I make Jess go out and stand in the yard with the dog
Scott's
until
always,
the dog pees.
I was going to say, when is the last time you've even pottied a dog? Yeah, literally. No, and
but
you want to talk about...
you go out there and it's a pain in the ass.
I am like the potty queen. I have a big issue with pottying. But legitimately, like, yeah, all of my dogs, like, know if it's pouring rain, if it's, snowing really bad, the quicker you shit, the quicker you get back in the house. So, like, that is just the rule. Like, do it, and then you can come back in.
Well,
most of our dogs like the cold.
But also to interrupt there, yeah, they do know that. And sometimes they do just a little pretend pee because they want to come back in. So you need to watch and make sure they actually go, because Jess's dogs will squat on command and pretend they're peeing, but they're not really peeing. But they know they can't play with the ball or they can't do this until they've peed. It's like, okay, and they'll do this little behavior. It's like, no.
Get out and actually
pee.
pee.
You have to make sure they go.
You have to be able to watch your dog and know what's happening. But if you do have these, like, in environmental, seasonal situations with your dog, you have to create more control within the house. You cannot allow it to happen because it's going to just become a pattern once again. I don't want to go in the snow. I'll come in, I'll go on the carpet. I don't want to go here. And dogs at some point have to poop. This is just human nature. I'm sorry, or just dog nature. This is what has to happen. So I would go back to implementing a crate in the house or some extra supervision. And like Scott said, actually put a leash on your dog and freaking take them out and make them deal with it. You are out there with them and you are saying like, hey, we're going to face this together, but you have to go to the bathroom. It is very important that the dogs learn early that there is no other option. And that is behavioral pottying in my mind, when the dog says, no thanks, I can't do it outside. And then they come in the house and they have no issue doing it.
Yeah. And with Jimmy, we had Jimmy pee in the bedroom about, it seems like 4 to 6 months ago now.
Yeah.
And it was tied in directly to, he sleeps on the bed, he's loose. We get up in the morning, we start letting dogs out. His prey drive, that herding drive kicks in, where he starts running in circles on the bed, and he knows other dogs' stuff. So he gets overstimulated, and he hasn't been out to pee yet. And then what he did was he
marked on the bed.
He marked on the bed.
And
he wasn't on the bed. He was on the floor, but he lifted his leg on the side of the bed.
I was mortified. I took him in for a
thought the
urine.
dog
I took
needed
him
to
in
have
for blood
surgery or
work.
something.
I'm like freaking out. I'm like, Jimmy would never pee in the house.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
So he's in a crate now before other dogs get let out.
Before Cousteau comes out and everything else. Yeah. And these are the types of things, you guys, that once you rule out the medical stuff, especially if it's an abnormal thing with the dog, once you rule out the medical stuff, you have to go into behavior and think, okay, why is this happening? What is triggering this? And I think it happened 2 times. We went to let Cousteau out. He peed in the room. He's done. Like, right? Like there's no access during morning if he has not been out already.
If you've listened to this podcast for more than a few times, you'll know at this point, all our dogs pee and poop in the house all the time. And we're just running around chasing this behavior like, holy shit, this guy just pooped in the living room. Jimmy just peed on the bed. Oh no, it's Jess's dog. Just peed on my pillow.
It does. It's been a hard few months, but I'm telling you, Vital being in heat does change things a bit, and the whole tempo of the house changes. But literally, you guys, whether you're experiencing stuff like this yourselves, owning dogs, or you have clients experiencing these things, the sooner you get on top of it, the sooner you realize what's triggering it, the sooner you rule out any medical stuff, and the sooner you intervene with a behavioral plan, the better. I promise you, I cannot think of one behavioral potty case that has not been cinched up with training
Oh,
from us.
easily.
Yeah, like there's a lot of ways to approach this and deal with it in different ways, whether it's you're leaving a Kong, you know, so the dog's busy when you go, you're having someone come in to let the dog out midday after that mark. There's many different ways to head these things off. Even like I said, the belly band with the marking, if you're not going to get your dog neutered, and totally fine if you want to keep the dog intact, and neutered dogs mark. It's not like that's just going to fix everything. But the belly band has helped. Like, I cannot think of one. There was that really, really tricky boxer in Amesbury. That dog was the hardest dog I've ever done with pottying, and we even fixed him. So literally, if you put your mind into it, you put your brain power into it, and you really come up with a plan, there are ways to get help, but make sure your trainer has different areas to explore, right? Like, no, if you've ran urine once, like, stop running urine, stop running blood. Like, let's go to what behavior is creating
condition.
this. Yeah, exactly. It's not a thyroid condition. That's going to be the hashtag of the Quirky Dog. Okay, you guys, thank you so much for joining us. We will try to have our dogs not potty in the house this week. If you missed last week's episode with Alexander Butler, the copy method was an awesome episode. We really enjoyed that. And in the meantime, keep it quirky. Thanks, guys.
The views and opinions expressed by the hosts, guests, or callers of this program do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe, the United Podcast Network, its partners, or affiliates.